And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dangerous Rhetoric. This is episode 115. I'm Brentley.
I'm Dan.
And before we get into it today, I just want to remind everyone to please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. If you're watching this on YouTube, please go over to Rumble and follow the Dangerous Rhetoric account on Rumble, like some of the videos. That's always a big help. And if you really want to contribute and you have the means, there are links in the description for that green paper that we all desperately need so much.
Give us your money, we're grifters.
And with all that said, I want to thank Daniela de Paulis for joining us today. Daniela is an interdisciplinary artist. She's in charge of this amazing project called A Sign from Space that we'll get into. But first, I want to just thank you again, Daniela, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Welcome to the
Thanks
show.
for having me. It's great to be here.
Totally. Maybe just give us a little bit of background. How did you get into, like, when did you know you were going to go into art? I was doing a little, background research. I saw your website. You came from doing dance and then multimedia. You got into radio. How did this all start?
Yeah, it's a long journey. So I've been always interested in art. So when I was 18, I was mostly focusing on dance and contemporary dance, and I still treasure what I learned as a dancer so much. It's been really fundamental for my work. Then I moved into interdisciplinary work, combining performance with video installations and other technologies. And in 2009, so 14 years ago, I started working with radio technologies, and I started working with scientists, and that really changed the way I work and completely changed me as an artist. But the reason why I still treasure my background as a dancer is because I wouldn't have been able to have this mindset that allowed me to make a signing space without having that background. So I was very influenced, very interested in contact improvisation and other forms of live performance art. And if you're familiar with contact improvisation and other similar dance forms, essentially it's an open stage where people start dancing and more people join. And it is improvised, but there is a flow that belongs to the whole space that really is shared by all participants. So this feeling of a shared space and this feeling of a common experience that is joining all participants is really what informed, I think, my follow-up work. And especially now with the signing space, I think this is some sort of choreography that I'm creating with people joining in from all around the world, including also my collaborators. It's somehow choreographed, but also allows for a lot of free participation, and we move together with the flow. We had no idea how the public would respond when we launched this project. We thought, okay, it could be that maybe only a bunch of really technical people reply. Maybe we just get like 100 people who are really into tech and might get excited about this. Or we just did not know what to expect. And instead we saw this overflowing interest from all around the world. And we are submerged by responses, emails, drawings, texts. The Discord chat has been constantly active, day and night, 24/7. With about 250 people working together at any time of the day and night. So it's been incredibly well received, and we just did not expect that. But if I didn't have this mindset of adjusting continuously to the situation and somehow facilitating moving with the people who are working with me at the moment. So I consider even people who work remotely, participants who send a text or a drawing, I consider it as a dancer in this kind of global stage, and totally borrow that from the live performance art background.
Awesome. That's that. It's really kind of interesting when people sort of naturally come together and fit like different pieces, and then the choreography of the interaction just sort of like is a manifestation of everyone coming together, having a sort of like mind or shared values or shared goals. And it's fascinating to see, especially in humans. We're so complicated. It's like reminds me of like starlings in flight, when you see those birds doing the big forms in the sky. It's very similar but different, because we're humans.
I also want to say that I think dancing is a really interesting analogy for the universe itself and space itself. When you observe the whole process of how everything interconnects, like it's like a giant cosmic dance in a sense. So that was kind of where my mind was going when you were talking. I'm like, it sort of makes sense that a dancer with this sort of approach to dance would then take that to something that has to do with space.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also especially with this project, we had to really think about the movement of the Earth and the movement of Mars and the movement of the satellite around Mars to make it happen. So there was a specific window of time during which we could do this event. We couldn't have done it, for example, in a few months, because Mars is moving away from Earth. So it had to be done within a certain time of the year. Otherwise, we would have to wait another 2 years to present this project. So it is indeed all about movement, even cosmic movement, and we are all connected. With it has to be all kind of orchestrated. It's really about this synergy of humans and also the celestial spheres, if you like, and even machines that we created that are moving around on these spheres and with us in time and space.
Well, you started to get into it. Maybe we can just let's lay it out for people that are joining us that haven't heard of the project, that aren't sure what's going on. Can you just give like a little introduction and summary of A Sign from Space, and what started, what's happened so far, and what the basically the goal of the project is?
Sure. Well, A Sign in Space is a kind of, I call it a global theater event. It could be also perceived as a film without making a film. When you mentioned earlier Contact, this film Contact that has entered this collective unconscious by now. We all watched Contacts. It's part of our history, of our cultural history, and somehow I also as an artist I created these experiences, these collective experiences that are filmic because they're fictional. But instead of going to the cinema to watch a film, you experience it. It's part of society. It's embedded in society. So it is an experience that you remember probably the same way you will remember a film in 20 years. I don't know. So I would be very interested in knowing how in a few years people might remember this event, reading it maybe on the paper, etc. But to summarize the project, it's an event during which we simulated first contact. So I basically brought together a large network of people who mostly are people I've met in conferences or other events from around the world, scientists, artists. And so I brought together scientists from the European Space Agency, with scientists from radio observatories in the US and Italy. And with the European Space Agency, we agreed to have one of their spacecraft called the Trace Gas Orbiter transmitting a simulated extraterrestrial message towards Earth. And the message was received by 3 large radio telescopes on Earth, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, the Allen Telescope Array in California, and the Medicina Observatory in Italy. Also, other telescopes joined in. When they found out about this event, they pointed towards Mars, and they also managed to receive this signal. So it was really an event that brought together many people from around the world. And so for me, I think the artistic question was mostly would we ever be able to make sense of an extraterrestrial message? Would we ever understand what it means? Or how would we make sense of it, especially in 2023, when we are, humankind is able to communicate across continents through social media and a lot of other options. So at this point, we reached a level in which we create meaning not only locally, as it used to be, but we create meaning as a global species. So we are able to do it. We have the means to do it. So can we do it? Can we do it as if we received an extraterrestrial signal, and how would we give any meaning to it? So I think that was the artistic challenge, and maybe even quite philosophical, if you like, that I was trying to achieve with this project.
And how did you, like, who came up with the alien signal? Like, was it mathematicians, and like, how did that come about?
That took 2 years of work. So when I started this project, it was not difficult to bring people together. It was actually relatively easy. When I started suggesting this, proposing this project to various scientific institutions, they all pretty much immediately agreed to take part on it. So it wasn't difficult to bring these incredibly established scientists and institutions together. But I think the most challenging part of the project was the message composition. And I'm not kidding. We took 2 years to create this message. I started bringing together specialists from anthropology, poetry, philosophy, and more, and astronomers, etc. And then we used to meet on a regular basis for about a year and a half. After a year and a half, I still was not satisfied with what we actually achieved. So eventually I got in touch with a computer scientist called Giacomo Miceli, whom I discovered thanks to one of his artwork. He's also an artist. And I found out about this project he created a few months ago called Infinite Conversation. I was really impressed by this work, and I thought, I think I should really speak to this person and to finally crack the message and to really reach a conclusion. So that was the turning point when we started meeting with Giacomo. After a couple of months, I knew we had the message I wanted to create. We managed really to just his technical skills were responding really well to my artistic suggestions, and at that point those the two kind of became really we started working really in synchronicity. So I wouldn't be able to say, okay, it's fully my message. It's really a co-creation at that point. And later we had a third step that was developed by an astronomer called Roy Smith, and he's also contributed heavily on the final, on the composition of the message. So for me, these three people, who are actually the only three people on this planet at the moment who know about the message, we were really co-creators. So I feel like we are the three simulated extraterrestrials. Yeah, glad you're showing the website. It's been also quite a work in progress. I don't know if you read the news, but on Discord today, they actually managed to extract the message from the radio signal. So the first week, sorry, I don't hear you anymore. Apparently,
My bad.
It's me. Okay. I hope I wasn't talking over you, but
no, you're good. I occasionally, we're in New York City, and it's very, very loud here. Occasionally, we get buses,
so
trucks,
when you're
sirens.
When you're talking, we have to keep muting
so that it doesn't come over.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's fine.
No, yeah, the website looks great, by the way.
It does. You can pull up
Thank
the team too. You know, some of the people she was talking about, like Giacomo, and they're all listed there. And then there's just a lot of folks. Yeah, go to about, go to team, and then there's the full team, the advisory and message team. There's three different teams: outreach, education team.
Yes.
There's a lot of people involved in this.
Well, and it's not even a full list because the scientists at ESA, they are not included. They work as an institution, so they are not included as individuals, but it was a team of about 6 people, 6 scientists, plus a couple of people in the outreach team. So if we add these 8 people to the team, it's even bigger. And the scientific team at the Green Bank Observatory also is not mentioned. And so there are a lot more scientists working who are represented as institutions, but not as individuals.
And how did you guys get funding for something like this? Is it like you elicit donations? Did you write grants? Like, where does it come from?
Well, I eventually, over the years, because my projects are all a bit crazy, and so I learned how to become a producer as well of my own projects. And so actually for this project, it wasn't that challenging to write grant proposals for the Dutch art funding. So here in the Netherlands, we have a really artist-focused funding scheme, and so far they've always been very supportive with my crazy projects. So actually a big shout out to the Mondrian Funds and Stimularis Funds, who are the biggest funders of the project. And in addition to that, there is an incalculable amount of time and in-kind donations, in-kind contribution that has been made by the European Space Agency, the SETI Institute, the Green Bank Observatory, the Medicina Radio Observatory, Italian Institute of Radio Astronomy. So if I had to quantify the time that the scientists invested in this project, that the education team invested in this project, I think, I don't know, the numbers would be really, I don't know how I would be able to fund these if not with really a huge, but fortunately everyone, as I said, joined in dedicated time to this completely as in an in-kind base, simply because we all had this really incredible interest in this idea. So I think the interest is what mostly brought these people together, and convincing these institutions to dedicate staff and time to the project, because, well, we all wanted to make it happen.
That's amazing. It's so nice to hear people willing to dedicate their time in order to advance a project that has kind of like a global or even historical sort of, end game here. Because who knows, we in our lifetime, we may get a signal from space that is of alien origin, and you guys are sort of like already trailblazing down the path so that we have at least a blueprint to follow in the event that happens.
Yeah, I think the question too of whether or not we'll even be able to understand a communication from some other intelligence is the most interesting question. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film Arrival. It made me think of Arrival.
Yes.
And that's the whole theme of that. And obviously it's not a signal in that movie, like the ships actually come and they land on the planet, and then they're trying to interpret the language of these beings. So they send a whole team in to try to decipher what it is they're actually saying or trying to communicate with us. And it makes sense too that we wouldn't just automatically understand each other's language. So,
absolutely. Yeah, well, of course, Arrival is about physical contact also with these beings. So that would be very difficult to stage as a theatrical event.
Yeah, obviously.
But no, I'm very pleased that I tried to do this project because there were some academics, anthropologists who were really discouraging me from hosting this event because there is no data to base some research from. So the main reference was War of the Worlds by by Orson Welles, who we all know very well. And I think 1938 radio program? There was that very famous radio program where allegedly people panicked. And of course, by now we know that there was a huge exaggeration over it. But sometimes, I mean, this type of historical event, they still affect research even nowadays. So some anthropologists were very afraid of the possible reaction to this project, and they were really trying to discourage me from actually hosting this event. But this was anyway a very useful conversation we had at the beginning of the project, and that is when we decided very clearly that we would announce it as a test, as a rehearsal, rather than something that is happening and then we have to say, okay, this was just a fictional event, for two reasons. Because of course we didn't want to take a huge risk, or you never know, some people might really panic. And in addition to that, now we are so surrounded by fake media, fake news, and it's very hard to distinguish what is true from what is fictional. And so we wanted to be clear about that we are not actually taking advantage of anybody's good faith. And we just said, okay, we will be very clear in the media, this is a test. And I've been very impressed by how accurately actually all the various media channels so far have been pretty much echoing this message. So I haven't seen one single article misleading people saying we actually received a signal from space. All the articles I read, they were very actually accurate on reporting on this.
It is interesting to think about, though, like how would people have reacted if you did present it as if like, hey, we just received a message from alien. To like, that's part of your art too, to like see how people respond. But it reminds me of another question too, which is the question of disclosure when it comes to the UFO phenomenon and visitation, and what the government knows about that, and why they might be keeping certain things from the public because they're afraid of how the public will respond. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Dolan.
No. Mm-hmm.
He's a historian on the UFO phenomenon, specifically on the government's interest in it. And he wrote a book called After Disclosure, and it's basically all about that. Like, how will the public respond, say, if the government came forward and just openly admitted and said, hey, this phenomenon is real and intelligence is directing it, we don't know what it is. How will the public respond to something of that sort? And it's not like the government hasn't already sort of done that. They've admitted that UFOs are real. But I guess the real question is, how much do they really know? And if they were to disclose everything that they really know, how will the public at large respond to that? Will they panic? Will they freak out? Will they just be like, whatever, because we've already lived through a whole bunch of crazy things that I feel like a lot of people would just be kind of like, all right, well, I guess the aliens are here now. Like,
yeah, that is really, I think, one of the biggest mysteries yet. So now UFO, I believe they are called unidentified aerial phenomena. So they changed the name.
I still don't like UAP though. It feels
UAP.
I don't even like to say it. UAP.
Yeah, I think we all grew up with the term UFO. And also it's easier. It's more fun to say in a way. But I don't know. I think I don't know. To be honest, I think the government panics more than the people would. I think I at least from the reaction I got so far about my project, I haven't seen one single comment that was about panicking, or everyone seems to be extremely curious, and everyone's saying, "Oh, this is exactly what I was waiting for." I think we are all tired to think that we are alone in this universe. We can't wait for other civilization to show up, or just give some a different perspective on our life in the cosmos, I think. But of course, I mean, there are also military interests and a whole world that we don't even know about. I believe all these also funding are not even reported publicly. So
true.
it's a huge black hole that we kind of came to accept because of this status quo. But of course, nowadays, all these unidentified aerial phenomena are heavily reported by cameras, mobile phones, and etc. So I think usually I don't think so much about it. I never witnessed anything that looked weird in the sky. So I keep my mind quite neutral about it. I have no particular opinion on that.
You kind of have to be with a subject like that just because there's so much mystery surrounding it. Brett and I are eternally fascinated by that subject. We have like an entire section of our library about that, the UFO phenomenon. And I think you are right when you say that it seems more like the government would panic more than people. And I think that is kind of the case because, look, when you're dealing with these objects, they invade all of our most sensitive airspace. We've deployed our best pilots to try to intercept them, and they fail. So when you think about people who are in positions of power and they look at something like that and it undermines their power and they can't do anything about it, these things should just do whatever they want and they can't stop them. It would make sense that the people in power would actually freak out more about that than the people like us who aren't in positions of power. And also I wanted to comment on, the change in the term to UAP and why it does make sense, even though I prefer UFO because, we like that term. We're used to it. Unidentified flying object. An object implies something physical, whereas an unidentified aerial phenomenon, it keeps that mystery there because we don't really totally know how physical these things are, and the way they behave too in the sky defies a lot of what we even know about physics. 90-degree turns and stuff like that, like blipping out in the sky and then appearing in another place in the sky and that sort of thing. And we know this happens because, again, pilots have been deployed to intercept these things. Pilots have seen these things and testified to seeing these things. And if anyone knows what normally should be up there, it's people who spend thousands of hours up there flying around. So when they see something that they themselves cannot explain, those to me, I think, are the most important testimonies, or the testimonies from the pilots, because they should know what's normally up there. And then when something appears that they're not able to explain, they're like, you listen to that person, But I think it makes sense to change the term from object to phenomenon because we don't know how totally nuts and bolts this thing is. It could be semi-physical. It could be not physical at all, and it's an energy or something like that. We don't totally know.
Yeah, also could be a lot of reflection from light reflection from somewhere, or could be laser, could be I don't know, some other form of distortion of light phenomena that we have not yet understood. The thing is that also the technology on Earth is changing. So, and that creates a new phenomena on the atmosphere as well. So we still probably don't know exactly how the two go along with each other. But indeed, I remember watching some videos about that, and there were a few cases when pilots had a near miss collision with one of these unidentified aerial phenomenon. And so indeed, it's also something physical there and highly technological. And I think it is very concerning I can see why it is very concerning, because it is a type of technology that even the country with the most advanced chips, like the United States, they don't know what it is. I mean, It is pretty strange. Someone on Earth, probably even a terrestrial country, has discovered some scientific breakthrough or some technology
that's possible.
Is.
Richard Dolan, who I mentioned earlier, he has a whole theory of like what he calls the breakaway civilization. And in this theory, some tech has been recovered by people in power and has been heavily under lock and key and kept secret from the public. And developing alongside our public technological world is a more advanced form of development that's happening in secret in underground bases, kept under lock and key, and that there's almost like two civilizations developing at the same time. One that's this sort of deep hidden world with more advanced tech that the people in power are keeping from the rest of us, and then the tech that we are using right now, it's available to us. I don't know if I believe that possible. All of that kind of hinges on whether or not things like Roswell happened, right? Like, did something crash, or was something recovered by the government and kept from us? And do they know way more about this than they're telling us? Or is it the other way? And I kind of lean the other way, that perhaps they really don't know that much more than we do about this. And part of the cover up is to not undermine their power.
To mean mystique.
Meaning you create a mystique around it, because they don't want to let the public know that they actually don't have a handle on this phenomenon. They don't understand.
It's actually kind of scarier in a way.
Which is kind of scarier. It's like even the people in power with the best technology and the biggest budgets, they have no idea what the hell these things are either. And they actually know less, or maybe as much as we do. And that's probably, would freak people out even more, because it's like, wow, even our own leaders don't know how to handle this sort of thing. It could be either one. I'm not totally sure myself, but it is interesting to think about.
Yeah, well, I think it's not far-fetched to imagine that there are at least I would say two parallel worlds. I'm sure there are more than just two, but for sure what we have now available is way behind to what is currently being developed. And this is just how technology evolves. So if you think about, I remember working, when I first started working with radio, I was using a technology called moon bounce. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but moon bounce is a technology where you can reflect radio waves on the surface of the moon. So you transmit radio waves towards the moon using a powerful antenna, and you receive the reflection, and you can hear if you, for example, if you speak to if you transmit your own voice to the moon, you can hear the echo somewhere else on Earth. So it's like a diverted phone line, if you like. And this was actually developed by the US Navy in 1946, so right after the Second World War, to spy on the Soviet countries. This way they were able to listen to critical, crucial conversations and television broadcasts and stuff like that, and they could get a picture of what was happening in those countries. And only 15 years later, this technology became known to the public. So by the time they launched it officially in 1960s, it was already old. The military was moving on to actual physical satellites. And when it became a public domain, it was basically an outdated technology. And I think this is just happening all the time. And so the internet, and so any development in aviation or other cybernetic or whatever, I'm sure it's in the other worlds, it's much more evolved than what we have available now. So that's not surprising.
It's the same with the computer,
Exactly.
They were using the computer before that even became a public thing that, now we have them in our pockets. So, but
Yes.
another thing too about all of this is, and I guess it's kind of sad to think about, but it is just the way of the world, how much of our technological developments come from war and times of war, trying to fight our enemies, to create weapons, to create means of gaining intelligence on our enemies. And that's where a lot, if not most, of our biggest technological advances have come from times of conflict.
Well, you can say that even the wars has always something positive. In this case, war brings something positive. If you think about how many people died in wars, Second World War, but also how many people might have been saved by the technology that was developed during World War II. In a way,
Thinking of Alan Turing now.
Exactly.
He created the precursor to the computer in order to decipher messages from the Germans, and then all of that eventually led to the development of the actual computer. So again, something that happened during a time of war.
And many people live better thanks to technology. Their life, we probably, thanks to technology, many people are saved. So somehow there is this positive result of these horrible events.
The universe finds a way to balance things out.
It seems like, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned parallel worlds. It reminded me, Richard Dolan, he also, not only did he write AD, but before that, he wrote these two other books called UFOs and the National Security State. The first one sort of chronicled 1941 to 1973, and then I think it was 1973 to 1989.
To the 90s, I think 91.
Early 90s, 91.
92, something like that.
And basically, it's very dry history. And what he does is he goes through every major sighting,
and
every
documents,
landing, every response by major governments around the world, and he puts it all into chronological order. And it's a very interesting historical.
Not so much major governments, just to clarify, specifically the United States government is what he's looking at.
I thought he covered some stuff in like South America.
I think he mentioned some of that, but
in Europe,
the national security state he's talking about is the United States.
In the United States, yeah. Well, I mean, we outspend everyone when it comes to military technology. I was just looking at our budget. We spend $778 billion a year on military technology. And the next closest, I think, is China. They spend like a third. It's like 225 billion. And then Russia doesn't even break 100 billion. They're spending like 80, 90 billion a year. So we spend a lot of money on our military. But it does result in technology, that saves lives. One of the major things that we got out of the space race, for example, was water filtration technology, because they were trying to figure out ways that they could recycle urine, because, obviously if you bring water is very heavy, and we need it to survive. And that was one of the ways that they were able to, they were able to create these filters for water that have very tiny, tiny little pores so that they could remove harmful particulates and just get the raw H2O out of it. Plastics, rocket technology, all this stuff came out of the space race. So it's very fascinating. Dolan called the parallel worlds breakaway civilizations, and he postulated that there may be one or more in existence from ancient societies. So this is the idea that the world has sort of gone through a catastrophe or an apocalypse before, and there were global style civilizations like ours in existence in the far ancient past, and we don't have any record of them because some sort of global catastrophe wiped it out. And it's possible that certain aspects of those that civilization survived in underground bases or under ocean bases. Or I've even heard people talking about potential cities on the dark side of the moon, because the moon's locked in a forget what kind of orbit it's called, but the moon doesn't rotate basically. So we always see the same side of the moon, the light side of the moon, and we don't really know what's on the dark side of the moon because we don't have a direct line of sight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I keep a mind open about all these, for example, unidentified aerial phenomena and other ideas that might seem a bit far-fetched now, but we shouldn't underestimate the fact that there is a lot of secrecy around, in general, our society. So, for example, like thinking about 10 years ago, I remember when I remember reading about mobile phones recording conversations, or televisions recording people at home. It sounded like science fiction, right? I mean, we reading these blogs and these ideas was like, no, that's not possible. I mean, they wouldn't get to that far, right? They wouldn't do this. I mean, who in their right mind would do that? It was really hard to believe. And now it's even when you buy television, I saw, okay, it's just in the instructions manual, and they tell you clearly when you are watching your TV, you're being spied, and we do it for security reason, for tracking terrorists,
Also,
and that kind of thing.
advertising too is a big reason.
Advertising, of course, sure. So, but it has become part of our life, and we don't really even have any, I mean, not much concern. I mean, if you think about it in a lucid way, it's actually horrible that we got to this stage that while you sleep, while you leave, someone might tune in and just get some information about you, especially if you wear one of these wristwatch. I find them very scary because they know exactly what you're doing from just looking at your physiology. Is terrible. But some people just don't mind. They just go running.
They don't think about it.
They mind their own life and wear these, knowing very well that they can be tracked 24/7. So it's very weird. And we do this even with animals. There are these tracking devices for whales and penguins and so on. So indeed, but I don't know. When it comes to actual contact with an extraterrestrial civilizations, I'm a bit skeptical because I think it's really, really, the distances are really crazy. So I would find it really, that is something I'm not so easy to push the boundaries, because it would require some. And why would they come here with rockets? And why would they come here in flesh? I mean, in my opinion, if they ever manage to come here, they wouldn't come here in flesh, or they would find much smarter way. For example, the Tree Body Problem, I thought it was a great book because it kind of it goes beyond this idea of contact in the same way as maybe more old-fashioned science fiction might envision this actual physical contact with actual rockets and these saucers. And that I find really hard to believe, because I think it's just unless they found some laws of physics, or they found ways to travel through quantum means or whatever. But even that, I'm not sure if they would be able to teleport a spaceship and themselves with actual organic material.
I think those questions are interesting, but they're also showing, and I'm not saying that you're limiting yourself to this, but a lot of people tend to think of this phenomenon just from the extraterrestrial perspective, forgetting that that is actually only one theory of what the UAPs are. Extraterrestrial meaning not from Earth, something that came from far away and then came here. It could not be that. It could be something that's interdimensional or hyperdimensional, something that is almost native to this space, but operating on a different plane of existence or consciousness that we can't even really perceive with our senses. And it's not that they had to travel from a far distance at all. It might not be that at all. My conclusions on this aren't really solid either. I'm also skeptical, but I guess based on my research and how much I've read about the subject and testimony and all that stuff, the only thing that I really can conclude is that UAPs are real. Most of them can be explained away eventually, but there are a small percentage of them that are truly extraordinary that cannot be explained away, and that some form of intelligence directs the phenomenon. What the nature of that intelligence is a whole nother question. Why the intelligence engages with humanity in the way that it does, for whatever reason, that is also another question that I don't think we'll probably ever know the answer to. But what I can say is that the phenomenon is definitely real, and that governments around the world are interested in it because they want to understand what it is, and they want to understand why, when they try to engage with it, it reacts in an intelligent way and evades them.
Yeah, exactly. I think, as you said earlier, I think the governments don't have a clue. This is, I think, genuine. I don't think they have a clue. Otherwise, I think just as much as normal people, in this case, we are really equal, that they are afraid because it is something they don't understand yet. So we'll find out. I mean, personally, I think if they had... even if they were from an extraterrestrial civilization, Are they observing us, or why would they observe us? Why would they have interest in a planet like Earth if they are able to live just with remote technology and thrive just on like non-material resources?
Maybe the phenomenon is a sort of remote technology, and it is something that has been sent here, but there's not like a physical being in them to observe us. And why would they want to observe us?
I mean, we're fascinating.
We are fascinating, and why do we observe other beings lower than us on the evolutionary scale?
Yeah.
And all types of purposes that we use these beings for. We eat them. We harvest things from them. We experiment on them. We observe them to try to understand ourselves better. We look at how they work to try to understand more how we work and to compare and contrast. So, I mean, really, I can think of a whole host of reasons of why perhaps another intelligence would be interested in observing us and our level of intelligence, but it's still a question that's just very much up in the air, and we might not ever really know or understand why, which is why, you know, I said before that the only thing I can really conclude about the phenomenon is that, one, it's real. Two, an intelligence directs it because it reacts intelligently, and this is the thing too that really bothers a lot of scientists about this subject. And I understand why. Scientists want to conduct an experiment because that's how science works. We want to, you know, have an experiment, you have a control group, and you want to try to get the same results every time to be able to prove a phenomenon and to understand it. If you're dealing with something that is directed by an intelligence, and that intelligence is more advanced than ours or higher than ours, how can you subject that to an experiment to then produce the same results every single time? You can't, because that intelligence would be able to feed you whatever results it wanted to feed you, and those results could be different every single time you tried to conduct an experiment to then control the UFOs. You know what I mean? You can't really do that. And that bothers a lot of scientists because they want to have that control over a phenomenon to be able to test and to have the repeated results to prove what it is. And this is just not that simple, unfortunately. And I can understand why it makes a bunch of them kind of frustrated, because it's like, oh, I just want proof. You know, they're like, I just want proof, and I want to be able to repeat the experiment and prove it. And it's like, no, sorry, bro, you're dealing with something that is, I think, directed by an intelligence, and you're not going to get those repeated results every time you try to engage it.
Well, I think I believe the intelligence is very human, and this directing this whatever it is, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, of course, to be honest, I think if there was an intelligence that is not terrestrial out there observing us, how long have they been there? I mean, we know about this UAP. I mean, I know there has been a lot of these sightings, but also there is no real history, no actual scientific history of all these phenomena yet. So technology has evolved.
In the form of UFOs, and calling it that and observing it in that capacity and context, the 1940s is around when that started. But there are cases going back further than that, you know, of airships and stuff in the 1800s, and reports and you know, written testimonies about those sorts of things. And you could even argue that there are testimonies going back further into more ancient times, into medieval times.
William Bramley wrote a book called Gods of Eden, where he sort of went over all the ancient evidence for the ancient aliens theory.
So, you know, they could have always been here. And another question too is like, maybe their perception of time, or like they're operating just from a different plane of existence, that what seems like a really long time to us, like thousands and thousands of years of our history, could be a relatively short time for these beings as well. Obviously, this is all hypothetical, but it could explain why they seem to have been here for just like ever, but to them it probably isn't even forever. It could be a very short period of time, because our perceptions of time are different, perhaps.
Well, look, if they're up there, I would just say beam me up. I really wouldn't wait much longer to just I would be very, very curious. It's one of those very few things I would risk my life for. I'm not into extreme sport or anything like that, but this would be probably an event where I would risk it. A little bit like the movie Arrival, right? I mean, when the linguist gets in touch with this civilization, I think the main drive for her is to actually discover this incredibly exceptional being, and it's one of those things that you would risk your life for, I believe, and I'm not the only one, I'm pretty sure.
Well, remember, curiosity killed the cat too, so it would definitely be a risk, because you don't know, like, again, like, what if like they eat us or something?
But I mean, for people who like science fiction like we do, I mean, and we have this curiosity about the cosmos, this is probably a risk that we will take easily, maybe. I don't know. I'm just saying that if I ever saw an alien outside my door, I don't know what I would do. Seriously, that would be quite a fun.
I would run. I'd be like, I'm out.
I don't know. I kind of lean a little toward Daniela, and just the curiosity would get to me there. I might try to engage in some way and be like, hey, you know.
My favorite movie of all time is the 1984 classic Aliens with Sigourney Weaver. So. Run.
I think, I think it's incredible, because there are so many people who actually really imagine these alien contacts, and they maybe they even hallucinate, they report having been abducted. There is this, I think, this part of the human imagination that goes really wild when it comes to imagining this scenario. I think there is really an intoxication for the idea of meeting someone from outer space, and I think this is just, I find this fascinating. So why is that? Why are we so drawn to something coming from outside of our planet? I have no idea. I wonder if other species might have the same imagination about it, or I don't know, maybe whales, or who knows if they ever think about extraterrestrial whales or parrots who are also highly intelligent. Do they ever imagine what is life in outside of our environment? I don't know. It's quite amazing that the brain has evolved in that way to imagine these scenarios that are completely far-fetched. So I'm not surprised that I think here what you describe, there is a kind of concoction between human imagination that wants to attribute to some kind of meaning to something that is still very fuzzy. It's a little bit like the message that people are decoding as we speak on Discord, which is this platform where the decoding process is happening. And it's been really interesting to see how people interpret the shapes of this message. So the shapes are quite abstract, and people are trying to give it some meaning, and there are some really creative interpretation
and
of it.
That is how the human mind works. You're correct. Like, we look for patterns, we look for symbols, we make symbols, we're looking for meaning. We want to imbue meaning onto the experiences and the things that we encounter. And yeah, I mean, why wouldn't that apply to the alien phenomenon or to UAPs and that sort of thing? Another topic I wanted to bring up is that, and I kind of raised it earlier when I mentioned how the subject sort of frustrates scientists because they want to be able to conduct an experiment and to control and to get the same results to prove something. And when you're dealing with a phenomenon like this, you know, other life out there, UAPs and that sort of thing, I think it makes scientists uncomfortable because they can't control it. And there's a stigma around this subject. There's this general idea that people who are interested in this are crazy or mentally unstable. And there's something to that, you know, having engaged in conspiracy forums and things like that, and having been someone, you know, I've been interested in this subject since I was in high school, probably even earlier. And it does attract a lot of mentally unstable people, very paranoid people. There's truth to that. But because of that, there's this kind of stigma around it where I think a lot of scientists are afraid to openly admit that they are interested in this subject, because they don't want to be lumped in with those people who are perceived as, you know, like wacky. And I think I think we should change that a bit. I think we should be working toward lifting that stigma, and that there is nothing wrong with asking questions about this. You know, there's nothing wrong being interested in UFOs or UAPs and wanting to understand what that is as a scientist, and to be able to openly discuss the subject. Are you familiar with J. Allen Hynek?
No, I'm not.
Yeah. He was an astronomer, and the government hired him, the Air Force hired him as part of the 3 government projects in the 1940s to the 1960s that were created to officially investigate the phenomenon of UFOs. And that was Project Sign, which was from 1947 to 49, Project Grudge, which was from 49 to 51, and then Project Blue Book, which everyone probably knows more about, which was from 52 to 69. And they hired Hynek actually to explain away the phenomenon, to debunk it. That was his job. Was, here's an astronomer, and he went into it as a skeptic, like, all right, I'm gonna disprove all of these cases that come to me and explain them away. And he's an interesting character because he went into it as this skeptic, like, oh, none of this is real, I can explain it all away with science. He came out of that period as the father of ufology. The guy who said, actually, even though we can explain away most of these cases, he realized there are a small percentage of them that are just so truly extraordinary and beyond explanation that they represent a new phenomenon that scientists must look at and can't ignore. And then he created an entire system of categorization to then observe these cases and to catalog them so we can look at them. And that's where you get the close encounters scale. Like, you've probably seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right?
Right, yes.
Classic.
That title comes from the scale
that Hynek created, which are Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind.
I had no idea. Right.
So the Close Encounter of the First Kind is just a visual sighting.
Like seeing a UFO in the sky.
Like seeing a UFO, and it has to be about 500 feet away. And you can kind of make out some detail about what it is. Anything that's farther away than that, he didn't even bother categorizing because it was just
too obscure.
Right.
If it was close enough, it makes it onto the scale, you categorize it. First kind. Second kind was, so a UFO has a physical effect, is alleged. So this can be an interference in the functioning of a vehicle or an electronic device, animals reacting strangely, a physiological effect such as paralysis or heat, discomfort in the witness, some physical trace like impressions in the ground, scorches, or like affected vegetation, chemical traces. So any case where there was a UFO and then aside from the sighting, there was a physical effect left on the environment in some way, that would be a close encounter of the second kind. And then a third kind was they see occupants. So UFO encounters are in which an animated entity is present. These include humanoids, robots, humans who seem, humanoid-looking people associated with the phenomenon itself. And the whole idea of the scale is that there's a closeness to it. So the further away you are, it's encounter of the first kind, and then the closer you get to the third kind. And then later on, 2 other categories were added, which is the fourth kind, close encounter of the fourth kind, and that's the abduction phenomenon, what we know as that. So people who not only claim like, hey, I saw this object and I was close to it, but that like it took me, or that they have missing time associated with that. And then the fifth kind is direct communication, people who claim to have not only had a sighting, but that they directly communicated with the beings associated with it.
Well, you get me really excited in the possibility of communicating. That is what really gets me so excited about. But I had no idea that this movie was based, the title was based on this. So, wow.
Read about Hynek. He is really interesting. Read his book called The UFO Experience, which is where he lays out his categorization system. But I think he's admirable because, again, he came into the subject as a skeptic. He was trying to disprove it. and then came out realizing like, well, no, there's a real phenomenon here that's truly extraordinary, and that scientists should take it seriously, and we should be trying to at least categorize these cases to understand a little better of what this is and why it's happening. And I think that's the approach that more scientists should be taking. We need to lift that stigma that you're crazy.
Dolan was the same.
Yeah,
he went into
Dolan,
it. He was doing research into the history of the Cold War.
But he went into it as a historian.
Right. He was approaching it from a historical
and
angle.
his idea too is that historians should be able to look at this subject too without having that stigma put upon them that you're crazy for wanting.
Well, that he was seeing all these dates and places and people and reputable sources who were reporting these sightings, and he couldn't ignore it, and it kind of got his attention, and so he went from being a Cold War historian to being a UFOologist. So it's interesting how people get into it.
I think, well, at least the scientists I know, they keep an open mind about things. It's just that they don't talk about it because, of course, I think it's more like, you might ruin your reputation if, as a scientist, you talk about something that has zero scientific evidence yet. So, I mean, there might be some sightings, as you said, but those are not even explained. So there is nothing really there to write a paper about or to discuss with the scientific community properly, apart from, some incidents, etc. So that might be one of the reasons. But there is a scientist who is very well known who has been talking about this object. It has that very, I can't pronounce the name, but I'm sure you know which one I mean. Is this cigar-shaped object that has been passing by, has been spotted by astronomers, and the shape is very unique, and it's unclear whether any cosmological event could create that kind of shape. So there is a theory by I cannot think of his name, but he's a very, very well established scientist, I believe, who is based at the Harvard University, and he has been openly talking about the possibility that this object that astronomers have classified as I believe an asteroid or a similar object. It is actually an alien spaceship, and so there are actually theories by scientists also out there who are really also imagining that we should. They're really advocating for a more for a different approach also amongst the scientific community.
I think that's what we need, because some of them are afraid of their reputations being ruined, and I think we need to get rid of that stigma. And I think it's a shame that they're afraid their reputations will be ruined if they openly just talk about it or ask questions and just express an interest in the subject. You don't have to write scientific papers on it, but you should be able to at least discuss the possibility of these things, discuss the cases, the testimonies, those sorts of things openly, without having that fear that like your reputation is going to be smeared and you're going to be looked at as some tinfoil hat crazy. It's like, no, you're a scientist. You're allowed to look at these things and ask questions, and there shouldn't be a stigma around that. So that's definitely one of my goals with talking about this subject. And although I'm not a scientist, any scientists who are watching this, like, I want them to know, like, you can talk about it, you can ask questions. You shouldn't have that fear that you're going to like lose your job or have your reputation smeared for doing it. But I get it, because like I said, there are a lot of mentally unstable people interested in these things and conspiracies and all that stuff. And I understand why that, association is there, and people are afraid of the opprobrium that'll come onto them for talking about something that other types of people are interested in who obviously aren't scientists. So,
well, there are many examples of scientists who do scientific research a bit on the fringe. So there is a Nobel laureate, what's his name? Penrose, Roger Penrose. He is a physicist, and he has been developing a theory of consciousness that is really not conventional at all. So, and he is a very well-respected scientist, and somehow he developed this theory called orchestrated Again, it's a name that unfortunately I don't remember. So there is a way for scientists.
Objective reduction.
Exactly. So I think, if scientists, it's not that I think they're not afraid of talking about these things. It's that it's a very fuzzy subject. And I think these scientists who created some kind of theory that they are able to debate also in the public. They are not afraid of speaking of things that might be, they might have something actually very interesting to tell us. And this theory of consciousness, for example, is really, really interesting because it suggests that our brain has developed in a certain way as a result of the gravity that we share and the environment of the Earth, but also we have some parts in the brain that can tune in with some quantum world, some quantum reality. And you will think, oh, this is a science fiction book, and it's not something written and imagined by a Nobel Prize scientist. And I find that this theory is really interesting because although it is very, very hard, I don't think there is any evidence that has been proven in the lab. Conceptually, it's really interesting, and whether it will prove to be true or not, I think it offers some very, very important insights. So I think we should all keep an open mind about, in general, things that are also coming from people why not? I mean, unstable, so to speak. The vision, if you want to call them visionaries. There are so many artists who were visionaries, like Van Gogh or Philip K. Dick, for example. We were mentioning him earlier.
Oh, I love Philip K. Dick.
And in his madness, he had some incredible intuitions some visions that are really beyond the...
Baylis is a really interesting book where he kind of based the whole story on that with some of his weird experiences that he had. And, some might call it psychosis or say that, he was schizophrenic or whatever. But whatever happened to him, it definitely gave him a fascinating insight on the universe and consciousness. And I've read a few of his novels. I'm a fan of Philip K. Dick. I got to read more of him.
He's so good.
He wrote so many books.
It's incredible because I'm also really passionate about Philip K. Dick, and if you look at his trajectory as a writer, it's quite incredible. Yeah. So I remember reading some of his earliest books, and they were really accounts of the American society in the 1950s, and they were extremely accurate and very forward, very much ahead of their time in how he was making this social commentary about people living in the suburbs of this small town in the US. And then he changed and started from these. He kept looking at people living on the verge of society, but with that incredibly visionary idea that somehow our individual existence is connected with some other life somewhere out there, and that other life is even having an impact on our even trivial movements. I remember not Valis, but there was another book, I can't remember now the title, where the main character, one of the main character, was really directly influenced by some intelligence out there that was using some satellite technology. In a way, I mean, it might sound very far-fetched, but on the other hand, it is true that if you think about it, this is also quite human. If you think that we, from the ground, we manipulate, we operate satellites even on Mars or beyond, and then these satellites in reverse, they affect human life because by looking at space, they also allow us to to get data, and they're also looking at us. They're looking at how we move on this planet. They're looking at how traffic moves, how other animals move. So there is actually now, it is fair to say that the technology in outer space is affecting us. And there is this two-way communication between Earth and space that is, so in a way, even in a very pragmatic sense, what Philip K. Dick was writing in the 70s has very much happened, also in terms of security and how the privacy is breached by those advanced technologies. That this technology is able to really spy on people's life, as we were saying earlier. So I think there is for sure something in these extreme visions. There is something which tells a lot about how we live, how I think how just we evolve with technology. Technology is also an endless source of inspiration and fear. If you think about AI now, AI is another incredibly scary yet extremely inspiring technology. If you think about the amount of books that have been written about AI, they either.
Well, on that note too, it's interesting to realize just how much science fiction has almost been like prophetic when you look at science fiction. It predicted things that are happening decades ago, some of it even 100 years ago, and
absolutely
was predicting the direction we were heading in. And AI is one of those things. Like science fiction writers were writing about that for a very long time, and now here we are. We are now in the era where that is actually being developed. It is actually happening and playing out before our eyes. And, you know, Philip was one of those people who was thinking about these things. I was trying to look for the book that you were talking about that was similar to Paulis. It might be
so
one
many titles.
Yeah, he has so many. So I've only read, like, the last one I read was A Scanner Darkly, which is another interesting book, you know, when thinking about psychedelics and those substances and what they do to alter our states of consciousness and what that means. I read Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. I read Paulis. I read Ubik. I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is an awesome book. And anyone who's ever seen Blade Runner, that's
it's a mess.
That was based on. But I need to read more. He's got a ton of freaking novels. So
brilliant.
Conversation makes me want to pick another one up soon.
And you know what? I wonder if, for example, David Lynch, I wonder if he has been also greatly inspired by Philip K. Dick.
Probably.
Because some of his films, when everything somehow at the end derails, and from this life in a small urban town suddenly becomes this nightmare, this story where there is no end.
Yeah,
there is so much of also Philip K. Dick style in those movies. So I find also that kind of there is a word in art. I don't know if you ever heard of the word dérive. Dérive is actually a French word that means in art means when you just let your imagination go completely out of joint, completely to quote a book by Philip K. Dick, but that kind of imaginary dérive, it's something which I find really intriguing about Philip K. Dick and also David Lynch, because it is so outside of our daily life. You know, it's something we are not allowed to experience. But there is such a need also for humans to be completely out of joint. You know, we need that moment. We need that also to push our mind so much further than our limits. So I think it's a great reading Philip K. Dick. It's a bit like one of those experiences, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to kind of wrap it up. We've been going about an hour and 20.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to A Sign from Space. So it looks like you guys started doing the decryption on the 25th of May, so it's still very fresh. People can get involved if they're interested. Let me pull this up here.
Pull up the website.
It's right here. So you guys have these little dispatches coming out once a day. Can you just give us like what's happening right now? What's the timeline like? How long do you anticipate?
It sounds like it's supposed to be infinite. The project's supposed to just go on.
Yeah,
I understand.
exactly.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I don't remember what it was, but I heard about this a while ago, and it was this art project of this continuous piece of music. You know what I'm talking about there, where it's still playing now, I believe. It's supposed to be like the longest performance ever. It reminds me
1,000 years, I remember. Something like that. Yes. In the UK, if I remember correctly, it's
so it reminds me of that.
Is this just like an ongoing thing?
Yes.
I think it will be, because, as I said, if we ever receive the signal from space, and the signal, if the signal contains a message, well, we might never be able to give this message a real meaning as humankind. We might always speculate about what is this civilization trying to say, or I think it will be a quest that we would endure probably for a very long time. Who knows? We are still debating over human artifacts. Some artifacts have not been fully understood even from 2,000 years ago, and I think something like that would be even more radically incomprehensible for the human mind.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. The other thing I was thinking about while you guys were discussing the differences with people who have mental disorder and like, different kind of things is like people who go on these DMT trips and they sort of like go out into space and they have interactions with these, like they call them machine elves. I don't know. I've never done it. But it reminded me of that. And there just seems to be like so much space to explore that's not our standard three-dimensional physical understanding of actual, like space that we have access to. Our perceptual range as humans is quite limited. We can only see a very small bit of the color spectrum. We can only hear a very small bit of the audio spectrum. And there's just so much else out there. There could be whole dimensions of things happening beyond our perceptual range that we're just not aware of because we haven't, we can't perceive it.
Absolutely. But can I say something about our artists and scientists, and in general, anyone with a great imagination? I feel like the more I work with scientists, the more I realize we are both scientists and artists. We are both gifted with an incredibly strong imagination, because when I think about the discovery in science, you couldn't really come up with those concepts in the first place if you didn't have this incredibly inquiring mindset. If we think about the recent, the discovery of this visualization of a black hole, that's insane if you think about it. It's so
DNA
of DNA, exactly, and everything else.
Was it Watson or Crick? They had a dream about the structure of DNA, and then later were able to verify that it makes me think of Watson and Crick and having that sort of that divine spark of inspiration of imagining something and then being able to go forward and then to verify that, to prove it based on that intuition, which is very much like a creative spark.
Absolutely. I find that incredible. It's a little bit like what we do as an artist. We start from an intuition and we try to make this intuition tangible, visible, or it is very much the same process. So
I'm a painter, so I definitely.
You are? Okay, great.
Yep, I'm a painter and a poet. I write poetry as well, and I play music. I play drums. So I'm very much in that creative mindset. And although I'm interested in things like science and like, don't ask me to calculate anything. That is not my field, but put a brush in my hand, different thing. I know what I'm doing. So, but I do think, like you said, there's definitely a similarity in the mindset that is required to explore the universe and to discover more, that is also required in creating something that is
absolutely
or artistic and intriguing.
Yeah, and these are very big questions, kind of addressing things that are not simply. I mean, yes, science is also looking at very tangible, pragmatic things, but also asking these questions that are primarily just a strong curiosity about about nature. So sometimes when I read these comments, we shouldn't spend money for this or for that. We shouldn't spend money for art. We shouldn't spend money for, I don't know, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I, of course, strongly disagree, because if we as humans were stripped of this ability to research, to look further, you really essentially amputate the human mind. Just it's really a huge I think assault to human nature in my opinion.
But it's the same for the arts too. Like, you want to fund the creation of beautiful things, and you want to have a society where you're surrounded by beautiful things. And I think it's why it's why somewhere like Europe is so invaluable. And I haven't been to Europe yet, and I really want to travel there and to see it. But just that history of art that goes so far back, and when you go to a place like that, like, you can't put a price on the beauty you're surrounded with. It's like something like that is priceless. And there are other places that don't have that, and perhaps those societies should invest more in that, and having more beautiful things in your culture, in your society, in your city. You want to be surrounded by that stuff because it's awe-inspiring. If anything, that sort of stuff makes scientists want to discover more. It gives you that inspiration, and it's designed to do that, like a Gothic cathedral, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is designed to have the effect it has on you when you walk into it. And even people who are atheists and don't believe in God at all will walk into a place like that, and they will feel that sense of awe and inspiration. Like, wow, human hands built this in devotion to something bigger than them. And whether they believe in that something bigger or not, they will have that feeling. They will understand that feeling because the building itself is artistically designed, proportionally designed to have that effect on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's important to change a bit the dominant narrative that unfortunately we witness nowadays about having to justify every dollar for research or for things that are not immediately not considered immediately useful. I think that's a very narrow-minded approach. Because thanks to these things also we grow and we improve our life, and it's just it's just a great returns in terms of just richness, cultural richness, and it's really important I think message to convey.
It is important. And I think it applies to your project too. Like, some people might look at this and be like, well, what's the point of like a hypothetical message coming from aliens and all that sort of stuff? And it's like, well, the point is to intrigue and to get you to think outside the box and to ask questions. And that is what good art does. Good art doesn't just inspire you or give you a sense of awe, like, wow, that is beautiful. Good art should also provoke questions within you, provoke that inquiring mind. And I think that comes back to what we were saying earlier of how there is a relationship between science and art, just from that alone, inspiring that sense of curiosity and to provoke questions about the human experience, about the universe. What is our place in all of this?
Absolutely. But I just have this curiosity, as you are in New York City. What do you think is extraterrestrial about New York City? Because for me, New York City is also, I find it quite extraterrestrial. So
it's one of the weirdest places on Earth. That is very, very true. It's going through a weird period right now, too. There's a lot of economic turmoil. There's the migrant situation, which is changing things in the city as well. And just post-COVID and the lockdowns, things have shifted here. But I think there's a historical value here that keeps people coming back, and that even when New York is in a decline period, it will always bounce back. It'll always come back because people want to be a part of the story that is New York City. Anyone who is anyone in the world who's doing anything significant or important, whether it's in the sciences or the arts, will come here at some point in their lives and has passed through this place. So that is invaluable. That's kind of what makes it sort of extraterrestrial in a sense.
Yeah.
Just the melding of cultures and the museums, the cafes, the music venues. There's a lot here that is valuable, despite, say, the drawbacks of living in a big city, because there are a lot of those too. You know, crime, noise, all of that. Crazy people, like you will encounter some of the weirdest people you can think of here. That it will feel like am I on another freaking planet? Like,
so if extraterrestrial landed, they might be already in New York City.
they fit right in.
Who knows? Next door.
Right in. Oh boy, I guess we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you so much, Daniela.
Really
for
enjoyed
spending time. Really appreciate it. Now you're busy.
Thank you. Really fun to talk to you. Great.
And everybody needs to check out A Sign in Space. You can download the message. You can hang out in the Discord. You can get involved. It's a lot of fun. And you we'll have to pay attention and see where it goes. Who knows? We may get a real sign from space sometime soon.
Let's hope so.
All right.
You're on Twitter, right?
Oh, are you on Twitter?
Yes, we are on Twitter with the project A Sign in Space, and also I'm on Twitter with my name. I believe Daniela de Paulis. So you can find me.
I will put links for everything in the description.
Cool. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe, give us money, all the things. We'll see you again next time. Take care.